My name is Jim McCanney, and in 1979 approximately, I was studying physics, mathematics, the physics of the celestial movements known as celestial mechanics. Also, I was studying the phenomenon in outer space called plasma physics, which is the understanding, the study of free gases, charged electromagnetic gases that permeate outer space. And at the time, this was a very esoteric topic. Not many people were really striving to understand this, something that a few space scientists were working on in back rooms. And what I did with my particular theoretical work was to include electric and magnetic fields, something that no one had ever really done in regard to the motion of the planets, moons, and stars. And at the same time, I happened to be working as an instructor at Cornell University, where they had a tremendous amount of data coming in from the Voyager spacecraft and other spacecraft. It was a repository of NASA data from the NASA space program, the unmanned space program. And I saw in the data the type of things I was working on in my theoretical work. And you have to understand, at that time, standard astronomy and space science and astrophysics was very much Newtonian. In other words, they only believed in the gravitational effects in outer space. At any rate, I started to understand where these electric fields were coming from in outer space, so my theoretical work had about a 20-year jump start on what the standard scientific community was thinking. And in the process, I began to publish papers and found a tremendous amount of resistance within the standard scientific community, to the point where I was basically removed from my teaching position and prevented from further publication. So that brings us up to today. I've spent the last 30 years literally studying this and working with the type of data that I could get from the space agency, from planetary encounters with space probes, and ultimately have learned how this process works to formulate our Earth weather. I've learned that comets are not dirty snowballs. They are an electromagnetic phenomena in outer space. And my current work deals with electromagnetic propulsion systems, the type of propulsion systems we need to get us out into the solar system and to the next star system. We will not get there with chemical rockets or nuclear rockets, which ignite matter and throw it out a nozzle, so to speak. These are very different types of propulsion systems. So my work really encompasses a tremendous number of subjects, from planetary science to how do we move about the universe with electrical and magnetic propulsion systems and concepts. The situation with comets was that there are many properties that we observe in comets, such as sunward spikes, electrical movement, even a redshift that comes off the light that's given off by a comet, which is not accounted for in standard theory. The standard theory for a comet says that it's a dirty snowball, that as it gets close to the sun heats it up, and this vapor of water and other dust is emitted from the comet nucleus, and the solar wind blows it away in this long tail that we observe. But what I concluded was that an object would come into this electric field that surrounds the sun, and it would discharge, and I use an example that is a very common everyday example. That is of the what I call the backyard bug killer, or the zapper. Everybody has seen this work where the bug flies in, it's attracted to the light in the center of the bug zapper, and as it flies between the charged metal plates, it discharges those plates. And the sun is doing something very similar, only we don't have metal plates in outer space. We had a negatively charged sun and positively charged ionic cloud that sits out there. And as something moves in from beyond our solar system, namely a comet nucleus, and comes in, it breaks that capacitor, discharges it, and the physical part of that electrical discharge is what we see and call a comet. And very early on in 1979, I predicted that part of this electrical discharge, the invisible part, which is an electron beam coming out from the sun, as it started to interact with the dust and gases in the comet coma, the dust part, that it would begin to emit X-rays. This was in fact confirmed in 1996, totally unanticipated by the standard theoretical model. What we see are dozens of examples of this type of situation where standard theory does not explain all of the fine detail in a comet. And so what I've discovered is that my theories were actually proven correct time and time again. And also the planets are discharging the solar capacitor, causing our weather. So much of this is related to the electrical nature of the solar system. The standard theory of comet behavior talks about the comet deliquescing or sublimating, so to speak, where the gases are emitted, and so eventually that comet would go away. We, to date, have only seen very small comets in our solar system. What's interesting is the ancients talk about huge comets. And for example, the cover of my book, Planet X Comets and Earth Changes, has an ancient drawing of what are obviously very large comets, the type we have not seen in modern scientific times. These have come by the Earth, the large ones, and caused significant damage, and we do have historical records of this. The point with the small comets is that, for example, scientists today are going out and they plan to land on a comet nucleus and drill down into it. We already have many pictures of comet nuclei, and they are black rock structures. They look like they have a burnt layer of tar on top of them, and there's really no gas or ice coming off of these, as the dirty snowball model predicts. In fact, the model is self-defeating in that when the sunlight is coming to initially form the comet, there would be some possible sublimation of materials. But eventually, the cloud itself is blocking the solar wind and the solar radiation to where the process would stop. And so the model, once it gets going, really doesn't explain what we see. It wouldn't keep the comet moving. Like I say, in historic times, in fact, we saw a huge comet in 1996 through the end of the year 2000, Comet Hale-Bopp. Typically, comets last a day, a week, where we see them, they're visible. Comet Hale-Bopp lasted for a period of 6 years in the night sky. Tremendously large comet, and NASA claimed it never took a picture of that comet. Well, we now know that the very top layers of scientists in this country are fully aware that comets are not dirty snowballs. But for some reason, they perpetuate this myth that comets are dirty snowballs. The one last point is that we are now aware of a very large object that is coming into the solar system, and there seems to be a historical recurrence of this object. Some people call it Nibiru, Planet X. My personal study deals with what I call extra solar system objects. Some are big, some are small, but there's no question that there are hundreds, possibly thousands of these objects which come into our solar system periodically and then go out in a long orbit. Some may have a 100,000-year orbit. We saw one last February 2003, which we now call Comet NEAT V1, which had a 33,000-year orbit, a very large object that came very near the sun, was tremendously large and affected the sun. This is the other thing, is that comets have the ability to affect the energy output of the sun. When that happens, we then get severe weather on Earth. So there's many aspects to the effects that these large comets can have on the solar system and on planet Earth. But the bottom line is, comets are not dirty snowballs. They are a very energetic plasma interaction of an asteroidal rocky body with the solar electric field. Very complex topic, and for some reason one that, like I say, is very much now accepted in the upper tiers of science, what I call the secret science in the United States and with scientists around the world. I should mention also that as early as the mid-1990s, my work had been translated into Russian and is being taught as the top-level science in Russia today regarding comets, the electrical nature of the solar system, yet it is hardly even known about in the Western Hemisphere. So now what I want to show you are the comets coming in from the south, and if you've seen my homepage, I've got dozens and dozens of these. I picked a couple just to show you, and look down in this region where I've got the mouse arrow coming up. There it comes, you see it? Boom! The sun explodes. Now, according to NASA, that's a half-a-mile wide little ice ball. Do you think that that's causing the sun to explode the way it does, and it's a little ice ball? Well, according to those people, that explosion is just coincidence. How many of these do you have to see until you realize that it's not coincidence? Comets are electrically... This is the flare. Whoops, I'm sorry, whoops. I jumped ahead just a little bit here. There's a kind of a thing on the side of this mouse I keep hitting. Let's go back to this. Okay, right here, the first comet coming in misses that flare. The second comet comes in and directly hits it, and this is the result. NASA says coincidence. That big flare, the biggest flare we've ever seen in the solar system. We know from historical records that there at least was one big object that came by Earth a long time ago. I'll just, instead of using years or thousands of years, because the Earth shows us that it has very tremendous changes that have gone on very rapidly, and modern science is striving desperately to use standard processes to explain this, but we have obvious things such as the polar ice cap was askewed very much from where it now is located. So there had to be a pole shift, a literal pole shift of the surface of the Earth. I could go on for a long time trying to describe these, but more of that detail is contained on my webpage and in my books. But the point is that there is a growing understanding that this really has happened, and my theoretical work explains how it happens when large comets come into the solar system and affect the sun, which affect us. I call this principle action at a distance. It's a very new concept in terms of astronomy, which is a 300-year-old science. My work is possibly 30 years old, and I developed this concept called action at a distance, where we do not have to be hit directly by an asteroid to be affected by something from outer space. And once these objects come into the solar system, we have now seen that comets in fact can cause solar flaring, tremendous output of solar energy when comets come near the sun and interact electrically with the sun. So those flares could come out to us directly, or they could charge up the solar capacitor and ultimately affect our weather indirectly. So I call this action at a distance. The situation and the term I use is my own search for extra solar system objects. Many objects are around us in outer space. Most of them are small, but a very few of them are large. And there are some out there. When they come into the solar system, they affect the sun, which we're seeing right now, and they affect the planets if they come near them. Obviously, there's a undercurrent of information coming from us and coming from the standard astronomical community, which suggests there is an object right now moving into our solar system, and this information is being kept from the public.